Alright, this is going to be a follow-up video to a video I made about a month ago about the Venus Project. Not surprisingly, I first made that video, and of course the first people to watch it are my subscribers, who tend to have similar views about the Venus Project to me. And then at some point after that flurry of comments, a trickle and sometimes a stream or a river of Venus Project supporters became alerted to the video. It's my understanding that they'll pass it around, and so then there's a whole stream of negative comments. And I was wondering what would be kind of the best way to respond, or if to respond. I think most of these people are beyond the pale in terms of reason. They are gone in terms of trying to reach to them, and even the ones who are receptive to new ideas or arguments are so emotional and so free-floating in their ideology that it's almost pointless. Even if you were to quote convert them, that would only be until the next time they saw a persuasive snazzy video promoting something else, and then they change their mind. But I think it's cathartic to sometimes do these sort of things. So I was trying to think what would be a good way to go about doing this, and I thought, well, I'll just read some of the comments that I got on my video. This one's from someone who commented quite a bit, YouTube user DJ Max. His first question is, are you retarded? That's a loaded question, as it's also a non sequitur and ad hominem. Obviously I'm not retarded. Dude, do you want to debate? He asked that. Of course I did. That's why I made the video. He says you don't have to make any videos ever again. This was a common comment that I received, basically saying that I should not speak out against the Venus Project. Others have told me that anti-Venus Project videos have been flagged down, presumably by Venus Project proponents. That has not happened to me, but with comments like this, I don't doubt it. Then he asked, do you think that you speak for others? I really don't see how that is relevant at all. I don't explicitly speak for anybody. I know that there are probably people who agree with some of my points, and some people who agree with a lot of my points, and a lot of people who disagree with some or everything that I say. I don't see how this is even remotely relevant, as if I were to claim that I was speaking for somebody, that it would somehow make it more or less valid. This is a comment that indicates that the stream of consciousness from the person who's typing it is not very clear and is not comporting with reality very much. It's not a mind that is geared toward logical argumentation. And I probably should have said this first. One thing you can tell by these comments is that proponents of the Venus Project aren't a homogeneous monolith. In fact, some of them have completely contradictory ideas about the world as it is today and the world as the Venus Project promises. For instance, their views on human nature seem, some of them are completely opposite. There are some of them who view humans as essentially just a great ape that require a certain number of calories and a certain number of meters of space and some minimum of stimulation, and that's enough. And there are others who think any comparison to animals is insulting to humans. There are some who think that the Venus Project is basically the perfect environment for humans and that it's the fulfillment of human well-being. Yet there are others who frankly admit that the Venus Project would never work with humanity as it is today, and that humanity needs to be bioengineered to fit the Venus Project. So one commenter was telling me this. I don't know if it's true that Jack Fresco believes this, that we need massive amounts of socialization or social engineering to make humanity fit into the Venus Project paradigm. On the other hand, I've heard Peter Joseph basically dismiss anybody who raises human nature objections to the Venus Project as being, quote, aberrant. Now, those are mutually exclusive ideas, and they're coming from totally different approaches, and yeah, I see both of them in evidence of the comments. So, I guess if you run the risk that people are going to say, well, that's not what I think the other thing, but Well, that's what I hear. Let's see. Blah blah blah. Basically, he says that this is DJ Maxwell. He says that since I categorically say the Venus Project will not work, that that is an unscientific position because science does not offer any absolutes. You know, I'm not a scientist and I'm not really an empiricist, but I wonder if there are many scientists who would agree that science offers no absolutes. Apparently, it offers the absolute that the Venus Project is valid, because if questioning it generates this amount of derision, then there must be something scientifically wrong. Then he strawmans me. This is another common thing you hear here. He puts in quotes, quote, "The current free markets economy is better than a resource-based economy," and then he says, "Prove it." My position is not that the current free market economy is better than the resource-based economy, although I guess it is. I think the current free market economy is better than the resource-based economy. But I'm not an advocate of the current free market economy. I'm in favor of an actual free market economy, not a mixed economy, which is what we have, which is what Sweden has, which is what almost everybody has. The only people who don't are the ones who have really made an attempt to have central planning, which is what the Venus Project is, and they have things many times worse than the mixed economies do. But I would like to extend the influence of those positive aspects of the mixed economy and eliminate those of the central planned economy in favor of just a free economy, and not the current system, though. And then he goes, this is something people said, that obviously companies generate scarcity, that they try and artificially make things seem more scarce to charge a higher price. And this is absolutely true, that companies are incentivized to try and do this. It makes perfect sense. If you are the producer of a good, if you can somehow restrict the total production of that good, then you can charge a higher price and for a longer time, and it's more profitable. But on a free market, you can't do that, because the other producers will try and take up market share by underbidding you, and basically there's a race to the bottom in terms of prices. This is the cutthroat competition that capitalists despise so much, that they always talk about in the turn of the century. And then these same capitalists go and basically institute the progressive era, institute government regulations to curb that competition so that prices won't fall so quickly. The other thing is that it's we don't have a free market economy. We have things that are retarding the process of prices going down. There are certain industries that are regulated enough that one or two firms or government-appointed monopolies have either monopolies or oligopolies on certain goods, and they can unilaterally restrict this, but this is a function of government intervention in the economy, not lack thereof. And I also point out that for almost all goods, the price as measured, adjusting for inflation, or if you measure it in terms of the amount of labor it takes to earn for the average worker, the price of almost all things is falling historically over time, whether we're talking about lumber, or we're talking about oil or coal, or the electricity for your house, or books or computers or televisions or automobiles, carpet, copper. For almost all goods, the trend is for them to go down. So if we would go back to, say, the time of my parents, they would have had to have worked longer to get a certain quantity, a certain volume of lead, or milk, or salami, or plastic, or wood than I had to when I was a kid. And if we go to their grandparents, it's even more. And if you go all the way back, I mean, the Babylonians were using lead as money, because lead was valuable. Lead had a high value per unit of weight, and it would have taken a farmer as an entire the labor of an entire farmer for an entire year would be worth like a couple pounds of lead, whereas now the labor of a farmer would be worth, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of tons of lead every day, or something like that. So this is an assertion that is repeatedly made by Venus Project people without any reference to empirical evidence whatsoever. It's just taken as axiomatic. They are correct that it makes sense for companies to want to do this, but it also makes sense for their competitors to underbid them, which is something that and progressives are like this too. I mean, on the one hand, the corporations are always ruthlessly undercutting their competition to become monopolies, yet on the other hand, they're always ruthlessly raising prices to increase their profits. They haven't worked out in their brains exactly, they haven't reconciled the two contradictory ideas, and they'll need to do that if they're going to have any kind of coherent understanding of reality, which is something that they could all use quite a bit of. See, I had asked, where should resources be allocated? I got an answer from Samarjit. Where should resources be allocated? Quote, everywhere. That's a good answer. Yeah, it took a lot of thought. This is another interesting thing. You know, a lot of them got mad at me for to their mind, conflating or comparing the Venus Project to Marxism, communism, or socialism, but then went on to great lengths to defend Marxism, communism, and socialism, how great they are. One guy kept telling me that, well, I just don't, I'm a stupid American, I don't understand how great socialism is. You know, it's common that Americans don't understand socialism, and that it has a bad rap that it doesn't deserve. And I just wonder if the Venus Project is so different from socialism, why do they give a shit if I think socialism is bad? If they're completely different, what's the reason to defend one? You know, why not just say, yeah, I don't care what you think about socialism. It has nothing to do with the Venus Project. Socialism and the Venus Project are very, very similar. Fresco was a Marxist. He has Marxist ideas. His supporters have Marxist ideas. They usually aren't keen enough to see that. I don't know. Like, it's really annoying to me that I don't know, they come out here and say this. There are also some Margit said that you know, what's wrong with the Venus Project? All they want is the common ownership of all the Earth's resources. You know, that's all they want. What's wrong with that? Well, since antiquity, people have been cognizant that that's a problem. There's a phenomenon that's very well understood and well known to anybody who's, I don't know, you don't even have to know about economics, has just looked at a little history. It's called the tragedy of the commons. And what that is if there's not private property, if everybody owns a resource, then the incentive is to use as much of that resource as possible and to exert the least number of resources in its exploitation. So if there's the classic example, of a pasture, a field that is owned by everybody, it doesn't make sense for you to go and spend a lot of time and effort fertilizing it and irrigating it, and you know, maybe clearing away debris, because you could put a lot of effort into doing that. Certainly, that would of course make the field better. But then someone else who has just as much ownership as you, because it's commonly owned, could come and reap all the benefit, and which is essentially stealing from you. So there's no reason for you to even do that. You're incentivized to simply graze your sheep, or I don't know, harvest the crop, whatever it is, to the maximum amount. And so what happens is the resource gets depleted very, very quickly and dilapidated, and there's no provision for its sustainability. That's the ironic thing about all this. For these watermelons who are so concerned about the environment that they want to create, they wouldn't say a government, but an all-powerful central institution that manages everything, which for my money is just a really bad government. But the tragedy of the commons has been known about since antiquity. There were ancient Greeks who were talking about it, and in all likelihood they weren't the first. And apparently their efforts to enlighten society about it have not borne enough fruit yet, because we still have people who think this is not only not a problem, it's a solution. It's certainly not the case. Let's see. Yeah, and then Samarjit goes on. She was a nice commenter. I say she wasn't belligerent, but she went on. Well, maybe he's wrong, but I think Fresco is sincere, so I think he deserves a shot. That doesn't really matter to me. I'm interested in results, not in intentions. I can say it's nice if someone has good intentions, but if what they're talking about is suicide, then it's a bad idea. Um, and I'm not going to cut them any slack because they aren't necessarily malicious. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. This guy, GTJ Hong, was just going on and on about how the definition of socialism can be confusing as the U.S. has been extreme capitalist. Yeah, and most other countries are socialists and also communists. Yeah. But not the Venus Project. Here's the most common cliched answer. Science solved the problem you're getting at, you dumbass, on the internet. And he also says, this is Joe Mama. Says, science also cuts my hair, brushes my teeth, builds your house, cures your diseases. Science is a process. It's not a moral agent. It doesn't do those things. People use the scientific method to approach those problems. Then he actually goes on to say that he has 2 doctorate degrees and has been doing hardcore research, and he agrees with Peter Joseph and Jack Fresco, so they're correct. So that's not a fallacy. Here's an interesting one. This is from Tim Odisi, the Linked Lad. He says that the Venus Project doesn't use force. It just, a majority votes for it. Yeah, well, then that's force on the minority. I try to make this really, really clear in the video, and people are just too stupid to not understand it. So let me say this again. The Venus Project explicitly calls for the coordination and control of all the resources in the entire continent and or the entire world. There is no part of the Venus Project where they say, listen, we only need a mine here, a couple acres here, and it will work. They need everything. Now, I know that there's a transition where they're going to have the first city and then go out from there, but within that city, they need everything. You can't have blocks and acres of that city where people are going to say, well, this is my private property. You can't build your maglev train through here because this is my house and I don't want you to have it. They have to have control over everything. And when they get to their plans, their central plans, their philosopher king delusions for the whole country or continent, they have to control all the resources. You can't have some of the iron and some of the copper and some of the silver belonging to private people who won't give it to the Venus Project, or will give it to them, but only on conditions, say, that they get something in exchange, like pay. Now, granted, if every single person in the entire continent says, you know what, I want the Venus Project, go ahead, take my property, it's yours, use it to fulfill the Venus Project because I value that more than whatever I had it for, then yeah, there's no coercion in the Venus Project. I just happen to think that's a really unreasonable assumption to have about a scenario in the future. People own property now and they value owning it. It stands to reason that at least some of them, certainly not all of them, will continue to value their property in the future. And it's very plausible that some of them, and this is admitted by some Venus Project people who think that human nature basically precludes the Venus Project, will prefer to keep their property and their resources at their disposal rather than surrendering them to the Venus Project. That's a very reasonable assumption because we're talking about tens or hundreds of millions of property owners here. And not everybody owns a copper mine, but pretty much all the copper mines that are out there are privately owned. Pretty much all the iron mines out there are owned. And all the petroleum. And I know they don't believe in petroleum, but until we have alternative energy, they're going to need the energy from petroleum to build this stuff. And coal and just the land. They're going to need the arable land for whatever agriculture they're going to have, or the places for their cities, the physical space for their cities. You're talking about large areas, and unless they're picking areas that are currently completely uninhabited, then they're going to have to take the property of people who already live there. And I'm sure that there are some people who are going to think, yeah, this is a good trade-off. I'm equally sure there are other people who are not going to agree with the trade-off. And the question becomes, if the Venus Project requires their resources to function, then the choice becomes, well, these people aren't willing to give their resources voluntarily. That means the Venus Project will fail. By its own definition of what it requires to succeed, it requires all those resources. There's no provision that, well, if 20% of the people who have the resources we require don't give it to us, then they won't have the industrial base by their own projections. And of course their projections are extremely asinine. They're not technical at all, but they're just kind of wild guesses. But it won't work then. And the question becomes, what will they do then? Will they just forfeit, or will they say, we're going to take your resources, which would be coercion? And I think this is the more likely scenario, because the Venus Project people tend to view the Venus Project is a panacea, and not only that, but a salvatory institution. That if we don't have the Venus Project, all of us will die horrible deaths, the planet will be destroyed. But if we do have the Venus Project, we'll have utopia forever. And so they also have a view that there's an objective morality, and that there's an objective theory of value, something that I'll talk about later. And they know what that is. And so even if a person tells you, I don't want to sell this, I don't want to give you my land, my copper mine, my silver mine, the corridor that you need for your maglev train, because my cabin is there, they're going to say, well, it's not in your best interest to resist us. It's in your best interest for us to take your property and convert it to the to the Venus Project. And so it's not coercion, because we're doing it in your own best interest. That's what I think is the most likely path. Now, there are some Venus Project people, to their credit, who explicitly say they would never do that, and kudos to them, but a lot of them don't have that integrity or the intellectual ability to understand that they would even be required to do that. And as evidenced by the responses I got, a lot of people, they're getting around this by just saying everyone's going to want to do it. And I just think arguments based on unanimity are just unreasonable in the extreme. But if someone thinks I'm wrong, and that we can just assume unanimous support for social systems, let me know. Yeah, let's see. And yes, here's one guy, all by 90. He says, please delete your channel, you're holding us back. That's a really good argument. Add against free speech to the list of popular Venus Project positions. I have a closed mind. Again, that's a straw man. It's a fallacy. It's an ad hominem. Not really an argument. Doesn't address anything I said in the video. Thank you of approving the world where we drive animals to extinction, dispose toxic chemicals into our oceans, and let's not forget war, starvation of billions, and corruption of the government. Yes, because I am for war, starvation, and the corruption of government, I guess. There was also a couple of people from Eastern Europe who commented, and one guy was telling me how much better it was before 1989. He lived in Czechoslovakia. He said socialism is clearly better than capitalism because he remembers it being better. And what was his evidence? He visited London. And he ordered sausage, and the sausage did not taste very good to him, and the mustard also did not taste very good to him. He felt that the mustard and sausage he had grown up with in Czechoslovakia was superior to that which he sampled in London, and it was so bad in London that he had to go and find a Polish market in another part of London to get decent sausage and mustard. And that proves that socialism is better than capitalism. This was a persuasive argument. We're having an argument here. We're having a debate, and this is the evidence that he brought to bear for his point. It did not occur to him that, interestingly, the superior sausage and mustard that he longed so much for in the socialist country was available in the United Kingdom, whereas I highly doubt the alternative was. I don't think you could buy Western sausage and mustard in Czechoslovakia at the time. I think you probably can now. This is such a blatant appeal to nostalgia that it's ridiculous. It's also interesting that they would just accuse me of being a nostalgia person when I'm an anarchist and I want an abolition of the U.S. government, yet I'm a witless pawn of their propaganda, and not the other way around. Now this is interesting. You know, when this person started commenting, I took it for granted that his name was not his, but the one and only Jacques Fresco made several comments on my video, and I just assumed that's not really Jacques Fresco. But, and I'm not saying that it was, but his YouTube channel has over 15,000 subscribers, and the comments refer to himself in the first person, like, I've been advocating this, I've been advocating that. And at one point, he even made reference to things that he had. It sounded like he had first-person experience with stuff from the 1950s, which is interesting because there are very few Venus Project people who aren't very young, and I'm wondering if there might actually be a chance that this might actually be Jacques Fresco. I'm not saying that it is, but it didn't occur to me until a couple days afterwards that maybe this was him. I don't know. But I will say he was one of the very few who actually made an actual argument. This is interesting. So Jacques Fresco says, I never claimed only TVP is progressive. Capitalism is absolutely necessary for the advancement of society that the Venus Project advocates. Capitalism is necessary for perhaps another 50 years until we emerge the emergence of better computer technology, automation with massive dexterity. That's very interesting because that is a very Marxist idea. In the Soviet Union and other Marxist countries, there was a very acute realization that technologically they were backwards relative to the West, that the West had more advanced, better technology in basically every area, and they kind of just came up with this idea that, well, capitalism is good at innovation for now, but it's setting up, it's giving us the technology to go past capitalism. And there's one theorist who considered capitalism to be pregnant with future innovation. And I think it's interesting that Jacques Fresco would share that idea. But interestingly, this is, you know, socialists have been saying this now for at least 70 or 80 years and probably longer. Actually, Jacques' first quote to me, the first thing he posted was that I am, quote, self-appointed guardian of the status quo. Yes. Since I am against the Venus Project, I am for the status quo. This is a very, very common argument from the Venus Project people. Basically, anyone who's against the Venus Project therefore supports either the status quo, fascism, war, you know, corporatism, whatever despicable things they want to name. If you're against the Venus Project, then you're for those things. That's, of course, a non sequitur. It's an ad hominem. It's stupid. It's not a refutation of any argument that I brought forward. But there it is, and I can understand if this was Jacques Fresco, maybe that's where they're all getting it from. Then he says, you must not have used a vacuum cleaner from the 1950s. This is why I was wondering if it might really be him. Or any other mechanical device from the old days. Quote, the old days. That's a relative term. Does he mean the 1820s? No. Ever heard the saying, they just don't make them like they used to? That saying exists because the quality of products is not improving. This is simply because most consumers are not rational with their money management and have not placed enough demand on more durable goods that once existed. First of all, if he can say that consumers have not placed enough demand on durable goods, then he knows how much they're supposed to place on durable goods. So he could tell us, for instance, that it's wrong for me to buy my cheap chair, that guy right there, that was a mistake. I should have spent a certain amount more, who knows, 10 times, 100 times more for a titanium chair that would last 1,000 years, even though I have no use for something that will outlive my lifetime by an order of magnitude of 10. That's the hubris that pisses me off so much about all central planners, not just Venus Project people. They know how much I'm supposed to demand. You know, he knows what my time preference is supposed to be. You know, When I was in college, I didn't have a big income, and I lived in a very, very small area. I rented one room in a house, and it was, I think it was 7 by 8 or some ridiculous small. Now, I had enough money that I could have gotten something better, but I'd rather spend the minimum amount on that and then use the rest of my income for other desires to satisfy other needs that I valued higher, like starting to buy gold and silver or guns or to eat well. And that's a subjective preference that is not something that can be assessed in a moral and a deontological way. But Jacques Fresco here and all Venus Project people, and this is implicit in all of their arguments really, they know what it's supposed to be. And it's interesting because if they really did know, then they should be able to exactly quantify and qualify this. This is the whole problem with those who say they scientifically know what your needs are. And they should be able to tell you exactly what your needs are. Like, to just say you need food, that's not good enough. If they have a scientific theory of what your needs in terms of calories are, then they should be able to tell you what you're eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the rest of your life. And if they don't have a system that's capable of telling you that, then they don't have a system that's viable, because you need to know what you're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Not in advance forever, but there has to be a process for you to figure that out. And for me, it's whatever I want. But for the Venus Project people, they have a system that's predicated on them knowing in advance what your needs are. And so they should be able to tell you straight up, this is how much space you need, this is what your bed needs to be like, this is how many books, and I'm going to come back to this later. But they don't have a system that can tell you that. They're imagining that such a system exists. It's the direct implication, and it's necessary for their society to have a chance, but they don't have one. Let's see. Now this is interesting. The calculation problem is indeed an obstacle, so that's a great omission. This is like the one part, all the comments that I got was actually an attempt at an argument that wasn't all fallacy. I was surprised. Maybe this is really Jacques. Assuming there are no current means for overcoming it, and there aren't. If there is a means, then you can just tell me. And if you can't tell me, this is supposedly your life. You'd think that you would have thought of the solution. But anyway, future theoretical solutions include automated instant production, in which demand is instantly surveyed, and supply is queued for immediate production. Deduction from total Earth carrying capacity based on conservative measurement, and a strategic system for managing waste from overproduction. So the calculation problem can be solved hypothetically, and he's admitting that it's a problem, but see, let's hypothetically by automated instant production, which is a couple comments here. There's going to be on-demand production or 3D printing, and a couple problems with this, but let me just real quick go over the calculation debate and why it's a problem. Human demands are infinite, and someone strawmanned me, and another commenter is like, what are you talking about? Human needs aren't infinite. You don't need infinite things to live, which is true. You don't need infinite calories to be alive, but what do humans demand? Humans demand whatever. There's no limit to what we can imagine that we would like, and that we would be willing to work for and strive for, even. And the idea that you don't need this, and this is the interesting thing. The Venus Project kind of sells itself as you're going to get whatever you want. That you not got the work, and just whatever you want / need interchangeably is yours. But if you read the fine print, the way that's possible or is borne out is through rationing. Basically, there's egalitarianism, and that's another thing. It's just taken for granted that egalitarianism is true and necessary and normative, and so the Earth's resources will be divided equally. So you won't be entitled to a bigger share than anybody else. You get the same share as everybody else. There is no solution. This is an insoluble problem for goods and services that aren't dividable among the entire population. So there are things that can't be given to everybody, just as a fact. Not everybody can live on the beach in Key West. Not everybody can have a Stradivarius violin. Not everybody can have the Mona Lisa or Michelangelo's David. Not everybody can have the Taj Mahal or the pyramids. And those are just dramatic examples, but they're not the only ones. Not everyone can have a 1,000-acre ranch on Long Island, blah, blah, blah. There's no way that the Venus Project can give you whatever you want. The Venus Project can only divvy up the world's resources, organize them through some kind of production method, and then give you your fraction of them. And it can't give you any more than that. And so I think it's disingenuous for them. They say, oh, the world has plentiful resources and the capitalist system is artificial scarcity, but the bottom line is they can't give you whatever you demand. They have a list of things that they will give you, and that's it. Anything more than that, and they're just going to dismiss it as you're aberrant, you're not supposed to want that, that's just advertising that's making you believe that you want that, which of course is ridiculous. Humans have been demanding things, have been wanting luxurious, massive amounts, capital-intensive things since before advertising was around. Okay, look at the fucking pyramids if you want an example. All right, there was no ad agency that made the pharaohs become consumerists, and there weren't ad agencies that made feudal Europeans have a strong desire for silk and porcelain and spices, things that you can live your life and never touch. Yet there was very high demand for them before there was sophisticated psychological marketing, so to speak. So the economic calculation problem here is that demand's going to increase, and you think the bigger the supply is, the more the demand is. So 100 years ago, no one was demanding TVs or airplanes or anything like that, and now that those things are available, people are like, oh, well, that would be interesting. So no amount of, well, the Venus Project is going to be super productive. Okay, let's grant that it's going to be super productive, which it won't be, but let's just assume that. Then people are going to adjust their demands accordingly. Oh, I don't have to work and I can have whatever I want. So today I want to play trombone, tomorrow I want to play clarinet, the next day I want to play violin, and I want to have a race car, and I want to have a jet, and I want to have a submarine, and it doesn't cost me anything, so I'm going to take my clicker or whatever and just on demand say I want a pony, I want a horse, things that people tend to demand. People like those things right now. I suppose they're going to have machines that will just make and build horses and ponies and the carousels or whatever, roller coasters, but all the hundreds of billions of things that people demand and just give them. Here's where the question comes. You can either assume that the Venus Project has the capacity to just grant all these demands instantly to everybody, which is totally unreasonable. I think most Venus Project people either are aware of that and shy away from that absurd position. And then the only alternative is that Venus Project is not able to satisfy all potential demands instantly. And so then the question becomes, which demands do they provide and which ones do they not provide, and in which order, and how do they decide? That's the economic calculation. So in a real simple example, let's say people eat lots of food, they eat apples, they eat oranges, and for whatever reason the demand for apples increases. Instead of 100 billion apples a day people are asking to eat, it increases to 150 billion. So you've got to come up with 50 billion more apples. Now, the productive capacity of the Venus Project can increase just like it can increase now, but it can't increase instantly. So it becomes a question of, well, okay, if we're going to increase production of apples, what are we going to have to slow down production of, at least in the short term, to increase the productive capability of apples? Are we going to have to make fewer oranges? Are we going to have to maybe not do a few maintenance checks on the maglev trains? Are we going to have to make fewer toys? Where's the trade-off going to be? And to just say we'll just increase, the most common response I get is we'll just increase production. We'll just, if there's a demand for 50 billion more apples or whatever the number is, we'll just increase it. But you can't just have a system where you premise that whenever there's an increase in demand, then the system will just provide it. Because then it says, okay, so I want a Star Destroyer and a Death Star, and a giant flamingo for me to ride to my golden Taj Mahal. Because if you can just arbitrarily, unilaterally, without cost, increase production, then you should be able to give me all those things on demand. And they obviously can't. So the calculation problem is, how do you decide what parts of capital equipment are going to go to this? What are you going to sacrifice? What are the costs going to be? Saying automation is not an answer. That's like if I said, how are you going to do an economic calculation? How are you going to decide if you want to increase production of wheat? To just say, well, tractors will solve that problem. No, tractors are a means of production. They're not a means of economic calculation. That's what the price system is for, but the Venus Project wants to abolish prices, and they want to abolish private property, and they want to abolish the market. And here's the other thing I just hate about this. They hate money. What's wrong with money? Okay, all money is for is exchange. All right, you have people who exchange things directly. That's called barter. And then you have people exchange things indirectly. That's what we call money, indirect exchange. It's a medium of indirect exchange. And it's extremely helpful and useful. All it does is encourage people to trade with each other, which is cooperative, which is mutually beneficial. Now, it's true, it's a very powerful aspect of society, and if you grant it to a monopoly, then there's a high incentive, a high likelihood that that monopoly will be abused. And that's what we have right now. That's what the Fed is. That's what government legal tender laws is. That's what a government monopoly on money entails. And that's why we should not have a government monopoly on money. Doesn't mean that all money is bad. Because exchange is not bad. It's not bad for people to exchange with each other. This is something a lot of socialists just seem to be revolted at, the idea of conditional exchange. So if I have a home and someone comes up and says, can I use your home? I might say, yes, but I would like something in return. Socialists and Venus Project people just seem to be reviled by that and just think, no, you're just obligated. There's two sides of this coin. They're either entitled to take whatever it is, or you're obligated to give it to them. Either way, you're looking at either side of the slavery coin there. That's just another way to look at slavery. You can just say, oh, it's not that the slave is obligated to work. It's just that the plantation owner is entitled to cotton. I mean, whatever. Anyway, so what he's talking about is not a solution to the calculation problem. And the other thing I really am annoyed by these appeals to technology, not only does he admit that these are invented by capitalism, but the Venus Project doesn't have a monopoly on 3D printing and on-demand printing. These are things that can be utilized and are currently utilized. And so to pretend like these are going to work for the Venus Project but they can't work for anybody else is just silly. They don't solve the calculation problem. It's another thing to say, okay, well, future computers will do it. Sure, no one knows how smart computers are going to end up being. I have my doubts, which isn't to say I'm predicting that they won't become much smarter. I think that they will, but to what extent we don't know. But that's the thing, is we don't know, so you can't start justifying your system on future technologies. I can't propose a system like a Star Trek system and say, here's my social society, and it's going to require transporters and warp speed and shields and all that sort of stuff. That's all nice. I can make a great show about that. But if then I'm trying to convince you to my society, and you say, well, how are you going to do it? And I just say, well, science will eventually just tell us. That's not convincing, because you don't know when that's going to be. You don't know if that's even going to be. In Star Trek, to make transporters work, supposedly there's a principle in quantum mechanics called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which makes transporting impossible. So for the show, they just fictionally created a device called the Heisenberg compensators that make it possible, but they don't have a plan on how to actually build a Heisenberg compensator. Well, Venus Project people, whenever they appeal to, quantum computers, I guess hypothetically it's possible, but we don't know. They haven't been built. We don't know how they would work. There's no way to import human values into any known computer system. I'm not saying this would never ever be possible, but currently it's not. And the other problem is, these powerful technologies, assuming they come to fruition at some point, which there's a good chance maybe they will, who's to say that the Venus Project is the best society to utilize them? I mean, the Venus Project people right now don't even know how these technologies would work. Jacques Fresco seems to think that only capitalism is capable of creating this technology. So are most socialists, by the way. So, if that's the society that creates it, why wouldn't that be the best society to wield it? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Yeah, there are just some other crazy comments here. I mean, and one person pointed out, well, it's not true to point out that their followers are stupid. That's not an argument. And I guess that's technically correct, but come on, what kind of people are you attracting that have just the most retarded views, the worst arguments? Basically, the most common argument of all is an ad hominem, name calling, conflation, straw mans. I must be for the status quo. Yes, that's why I'm wearing a Murray Rothbard shirt. I'm against the Venus Project, so I must favor, the war in Iraq. So I'm going to post this as a reply to that previous video. I don't expect to change many Venus Project people's minds, if any. Most of them seem to just kind of pass around anti-TVP videos and just badmouth them. You'll make all these arguments. They don't respond to any of them. Fresco is the only one who did, whoever he is, if it's the real one or somebody else. And all he did was to say it's a problem and maybe future technology will solve it someday, which is about the weakest answer you could possibly give. And it also indicated that he didn't really understand the question, because again, if he thinks the economic calculation problem can be solved by on-demand production, and I've heard people say this before, and let me just go into this a little bit more. If the TVP is always saying, oh, it's so efficient and doesn't waste anything. If demand for a good increases and you have the capital available to just meet that demand instantly, on-demand printing, like he says, on-demand production, then that means that those capital resources had to have been sitting there idle preceding this increase in demand. Because if you got your machines and they're busy fulfilling demand, they're fulfilling demand, they're fulfilling demand, and then demand increases, well, they're already busy filling demand. And so for them to instantly fill new demand, they had to have been idle. So the only way that you can have on demand for an increase in demand is to have idle capacity, which of course is a waste. If you have giant amounts of capital just sitting around, then it's possible that an increase in demand can be met, but then that would be wasteful. If you don't have giant amounts of capital just sitting around, then it's not going to be available for an increase in demand. And here's, almost forgot to go here, they're going to restrict demand because they believe they know what demand should be. And this is one thing, one of them goes, and we're just like chimps and we need X amount of this. This is what, at a very visceral, metaphysical level, I find so repulsive about the Venus Project. Because they treat humans like every other animal. Now, humans are animals. Humans are great apes. They're primates. We evolved in Africa, and probably in Africa, though that's getting refined a little bit. But humans don't, our needs are not just calories. It's not so many meters of free space and this much muscle tone exercise and so many vitamins and minerals. All right? But one of the people sent me a message and basically, this is what we need. All this stuff we were talking about, the demands, that's ridiculous. People don't need those things. If people were really like that, if people didn't have ambition for more than just what keeps their body from decaying in the here and now, then we wouldn't be having this conversation on YouTube. We would be naked in our own filth, picking fleas off of each other's backs. That's what we'd be doing. All right? Humans have been apex predators since the Paleolithic. All right? We have been able to feed ourselves for hundreds of thousands of years. All right? And the difference between humans and other animals, because other animals are satisfied once you get them their food. Once they have food, once they can reproduce, and once they can have food, they are essentially satisfied. Now, some animals need a lot of space too, so when we put killer whales in SeaWorld, they have problems because they need more space than that, because they're a fucking huge animal. But we can feed them, we can give them sex, sometimes even not even that, and they can live. And you know what? Humans won't die, but humans strive for more than that. I don't know why this is. It's somehow we evolved that way. Somehow, you know, we became smarter and smarter and smarter because there was an evolutionary advantage in doing that. There was a reproductive advantage in being smarter. And at some point, there was a escape velocity in our thinking, and it just became way more. I mean, I can't qualify it much more than that. It's more than other animals. We want more. We have, I call it, we have ambition. We have passion. We have art. I mean, last time I was reading this, I was listening to Scheherazade by Rimsky-Korsakov. That's not something I need in the caloric sense. But humans need... The Venus Project is a zoo for humans. It's, you're entitled to this much, no more. If you have a desire, say you want to explore space, which is a fantasy that a lot of people have, believe it or not. The Venus Project can't accommodate you. The Venus Project has decided you get this many resources. You get this many, that's it. You can't have any more. And if you want to colonize the moon, you don't get it. Because we control all the resources, and we've decided that that's something that you don't need. So sit in your nice organic cage and be happy, because you're not entitled to anything else than that. And now, I'm not saying that if you want to colonize the moon that you're just entitled to take it. No, you can build it yourself, which would be very difficult, or you can exchange for it, which is fine. And if people are able to provide others with something they value, and in exchange attain the resources they need to do something like that, whether it's build a factory, build a mine, build a mansion, go to the moon, invent the better next thing, whatever, then they should be allowed to do this. But the Venus Project does not allow that. It can't allow that. Because it can't divert capital resources, especially, although the distinction between capital resources and just regular private property is rather arbitrary. It can't allow that, and so it doesn't. And this is what really pisses me off about the Venus Project, because they have all this flowery rhetoric about, oh, be yourself, be human, blah, blah, blah. Humans need to live by their own volition. You know, there's a disutility to labor, but there's also invigoration from being responsible for yourself. And to just be provided for everything doesn't do that. And then to be denied, though, the chance to pursue dreams that go beyond that, which is what humans do. You know, my dog doesn't dream, doesn't have ambition. She's a nice dog, I love her, but she doesn't dream of the stars. She doesn't imagine any, you know, abstract things, symphonies. But humans do. I think all humans do now. Do most humans make a serious attempt to recognize their dreams? No. And even fewer actually realize them. But the Venus Project is just vetoing that in advance, because it knows what you're supposed to get. And anything more than that is just aberrant. It's aberrant. Well, they have it exactly wrong. They're the aberrant ones. They're the And here's the thing: people say you can't judge it because it's been, it hasn't been tried before. Well, central planning has been tried before, and people say, well, communist Russia and all that, they didn't achieve full socialism. Granted, they didn't achieve some perfect idealized socialism that you think is a panacea to everything. Here's what they did do: they abolished private property, especially in capital goods. Sure, they didn't manage to confiscate everybody's cap and everybody's worn out shoes, but they confiscated all the factories. They abolished prices in those areas. They have socialism in money, just like we have socialism in money right now. There's no private exchange in money. There's not capitalism in money. And the result of all of that was mass chaos, mass destruction, mass poverty, and complete, not just technological stagnation, technological recession, where things became less technologically bad. The first couple of years of the Soviet Union, they were producing the same amount of iron as they did under Peter the Great. Like 1/10 what they were in 1913 levels, something like that. There used to be, in Tsarist Russia, there used to be an auto industry, and that disappeared. There used to be an aircraft industry that disappeared. All that stuff. So yeah, was it perfect socialism? No. Did they succeed in abolishing things like prices? Yes. And that's what the Venus Project wants to do, and they don't have a solution to it, other than some vain appeal that in the future it might be possible. Well, that's not convincing at all. If that's the best you have, then you don't have anything. And I just wish some of them would come to realize that.